Hi everyone, welcome to the Unit 2 Study Guide, Reasoning and Proof. Our test is coming up very soon. If you have my class on B-Day, your test will be Wednesday, October the 12th. If you have my class on A-Day, your test will be Thursday, October the 13th. There will be a matching part on the test where you have to match vocabulary terms with their definitions. I'm not going to go over the terms in this video, but you see the words listed here, and they're also in your study guide. If I would look through those words, and if I didn't know one of those words, I would get the book and make sure I knew the definition to it prior to the test starting. That's a part of the test that's pretty easy to get all of those right, and that's something you should get right. So, number one on our study guide, which statement is the law of syllogism? The law of syllogism kind of has like two parts. And what it says is, if it kind of reminds me of the transitive property of equality or of congruence. If P, then Q is true, and then Q, then R is true, then you can skip the middle part. You can skip the Q part in the middle and go straight from P to R. So our correct statement is C. If this conditional statement is true, and this conditional statement is true, notice how the conclusion of this one is the same as the hypothesis for this one. So I can just skip those and go straight from P to R, which is basically what they're telling me here. That's the law of syllogism. So that answer is C. Number two, which statement is the law of detachment? It's a little different. It says, and this on your study guide is missing the P's. This is supposed to be P's right here. So I'm sorry that didn't print. Let's say, which statement is the law of detachment? So it basically says if the conditional statement is true, and then you come back and tell me that the hypothesis part is true, then we can conclude that Q must be true. So in that case, this is D. If this original conditional statement, P to Q, is true, and then you go back and say that the hypothesis part is true, then you can conclude that the conclusion part is true. If it's not in that order, you can't do it. It's not law of detachment. Question 3. There is a myth that a duck's quack does not echo. A group of scientists observed a duck in a special room, and they found that the quack does echo. Therefore, the myth is false. Is the conclusion a result of inductive or deductive reasoning? This is inductive reasoning because it's based off observations. They observed the duck over in a special room, so this gives us what gives it away as being inductive reasoning. Let's say solve the equation, write a justification of each step. So we're going to start with what we were given. 4x minus 6 is equal to 34. So my justification for that will just be given. And then in solving this equation, my first step I would do would be add 6 to both sides of the equation. When I add 6, that'll give me 4x. The negative 6 plus the positive 6 will cancel each other out. Is equal to 34 plus 6 is 40. The reason that I can come from the top statement to the next statement is the addition property of equality. Now, the next thing I would do would be divide by 4 on each side. So if I did 4x divided by 4, that'll just give me x is equal to 40 divided by 4 is 10. So that's solving the equation, but that's the division property of equality. So that's my solving equation, and that's justifying each step. 5. What is the relationship between angle 4 and angle 5? Those are on opposite sides of the transversal. This is the transversal. They're on opposite sides of the transversal, so it's alternate. And these are my parallel lines. They are on the inside of the parallel lines. So they're alternate interior angles. Number 6. If possible, use the law of detachment to draw a conclusion from the two given statements. If not possible, write not possible. So statement 1 says, if x is equal to 7, then 7x minus 2 is equal to 47. And they came back and told us that x is equal to 7. So remember what the law of detachment says. It says if the conditional statement if p to q is true, and you come back and tell me that the hypothesis part p is true, then what you can conclude is that q must be true. So in this case, this is my original conditional statement. My hypothesis part, the p part, is x equals 7. The q part is 7x minus 2 is equal to 47. They came back and told me that my p part was true. So I can then conclude that my q must be true. So my conclusion by law of detachment would be 7x minus 2 is equal to 47. It's just the conclusion part. Number 7, use the law of syllogism to draw a conclusion from the two given statements. If you exercise regularly, then you have a healthy body. If you have a healthy body, then you have more energy. So remember, the law of syllogism says if P to Q is true and Q to R is true, then you can skip the Q part in the middle and go straight from P to R. So when I'm looking at this, if you exercise regularly, that's my first P. Then you have a healthy body, that's Q. If you have a healthy body, so that's my Q again, then you have more energy, this is my R. Law of syllogism says I can skip the Q in the middle, so I can skip this statement and this statement, and I can say, if you exercise regularly, then you have more energy. So that would be our conclusion by law of syllogism. If you exercise regularly, then you have more energy. Number 8, line R is parallel to line T. Find a measure of angle 6. The diagram is not drawn to scale. So it's saying these two lines are parallel to each other. And it says find the measure of angle 6. This is what we're looking for. So one thing I know is that this 138 right here, this angle, and this angle form what's called a linear pair. And we know that linear pairs are supplementary, which means their measures add to equal 180. So then I can find a measure of angle 3 by simply doing 180 and subtracting the 138. And I find out that that is 42 degrees. So the measure of angle 3 is 42 degrees. And now I know the measure of angle 3 and the measure of angle 6 are called corresponding angles. And we know that corresponding angles are congruent, and congruent angles have equal measures. So that means whatever the measure of angle 3 is, the measure of angle 6 is also that. So the measure of angle 3 is 42 degrees, then the measure of angle 6 must be 42 degrees. Number 9 says write a justification for each step. Number 1, anytime you have the total angle is equal to this piece of the angle plus the next piece of the angle, that's called the angle addition postulate. So our first thing is the angle addition postulate. Next, what you can see is that they use the substitution property of equality to substitute those measures of those angles in. Then they simplify by basically combining like terms. Then they subtract 4 on both sides to get this expression right here. The next thing they would have done was divide by 8 on both sides. So this is the division property of equality. Division property of equality. Number 10, This diagram of an airport runway intersections show two parallel runways. A taxi crosses both runways. How are angle 8 and angle 4 related? So this is angle 8, here's angle 4. Those are corresponding angles, so they are congruent. So we know the corresponding angles are congruent to each other. Let's say complete the two-column proof. Given x over 5 plus 9 is equal to 11, prove that x is equal to 10. So we start with our equation that was given. Next we see that they subtracted 9 on both sides, so that's the subtraction property of equality. And next they had to multiply by 5 on both sides to get x equals 10. So that's the multiplication property of equality. Number 12, find the measure of angle RST. So they want us to find the measure of this angle right now. To find that measure, we need to find what x is. And I know that RST, which is this angle that we're looking for, and then they give us another measure over here. I know that those are alternate interior angles. And alternate interior angles are congruent. So those measures should be equal to each other. So I can write an equation, 4x minus 24 is equal to 3x. Then I can solve this equation and it'll tell me what x is. So we get x is equal to 24. And now I just go back and plug x in for RST. So the measure of angle RST is going to be equal to 3 times 24, which is 72 degrees. Number 13, find the value of x. This is telling me that line L is parallel to line M. The diagram is not to scale. So we need to start by looking at what two types of angles those are. We should know that they're corresponding angles. And corresponding angles are congruent, which means their measures are equal. So I can write an equation and say those two measures are equal to each other. Then I just divide by 2 on both sides. This will tell me that x is equal to 32. On 14, so this is a long proof. We just have to fill in 2 parts to it. But basically they say given angle BAC is a right angle and angle 1 is congruent to angle 3, prove that angle 2 and angle 3 are complementary. This paragraph proof right here pretty much tells us exactly what to do. So it says since BAC is a right angle, the measure of angle BAC is 90. So that's step 2 right here. This is the given information. And this first sentence here, by the definition of a right angle, gives us this second statement in our proof. So the measure of angle BAC is equal to 90 by definition of a right angle. Next, it says by angle addition postulate, the measure of angle BAC is equal to measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2. So this is the measure, number 3 is the measure of angle BAC is equal to the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is the angle addition postulate. Then it says by substitution, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 90. And since those two are congruent to each other, by definition of congruent angles, you can say that the measures are equal to each other. So now we're down to here. Using substitution, the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 2 is equal to 90. So that's this step, but I just kind of passed it. Here's our reason that we want right here, the definition of congruent angles. So because those two, we were given this saying they were congruent, we know that by definition of congruent angles that those measures are equal. So this is definition of congruent angles. Identify the property that justifies the statement. Line segment AB is congruent to line segment CD, and line segment CD is congruent to line segment EF. So line segment AB is congruent to line segment EF. Basically, if those two things are congruent, and these two are congruent, then you can skip the middle one and just say that this one is congruent to that one, which is what they did here. That's the transitive property of congruence. Transitive property of congruence. Number 16, find the value of x for which L is parallel to M. The diagram is not drawn to scale. If L is parallel to M, then these are alternate interior angles. We know that alternate interior angles are congruent, so their measures got to be equal. So we can say 3x minus 43 is equal to 80. Then we just go and solve this one. So we add 43 to both sides. So that's 3x is equal to 123. And then we can divide both sides by 3. That'll give us x is equal to 41. So if x is equal to 41, then those two lines are parallel. A gardener has 26 feet of fencing for a garden. To find the width of the rectangular garden, the gardener uses the formula P is equal to 2L plus 2W, where P is the perimeter, L is the length, and W is the width of the rectangle. The gardener wants to fence a garden that is 8 feet long. How wide is the garden? Solve the equation for W and justify each step. So they've given us all the steps to solving this. First, they got the given information right here. And next, you notice they just substituted 80 in. So this is the substitution property of equality. That's the substitution property. Then they simplify, so they basically just multiplied 2 by 8 to get us the 16 that's here. Then we notice that they subtract 16 on both sides. That's the subtraction property of equality, and they simplified to get this piece right here. Next, we see that they divided by 2 on both sides, and we know that's the division property of equality. Find the measure of angle ABC. So start at A, go to B, go to C. So it's asking for this angle here. It gives us an angle, but to find the actual measure of that angle, we need to find what x is. So then, since I know those two things are corresponding angles, and we know corresponding angles are congruent, I know those measures are equal. So 3x minus 70, it should be equal to x. So now we can solve this by subtracting 3x on both sides. That's negative 70 is equal to negative 2x. Then we can divide by negative 2 on both sides. They give us x is equal to 35. I know that this one is 35 degrees, and those are corresponding angles. So I really don't have to plug 35 into this angle down at the bottom. I know it should be exactly the same as that one. So it's also 35. Identify a pair of alternate exterior angles. Alternate exterior mean they're on different sides of the transversal, but they are on the outside of the parallel line. So 1 and 5 would be alternate exterior angles. But there's also another one, angle 2 and angle 6 would also be alternate exterior. Number 20, what is the converse of the following conditional? If a point is in the fourth quadrant, then its coordinates are negative. The converse just means to switch the hypothesis part and the conclusion part, but you leave if and then the same. So this statement would be if, and instead of writing the hypothesis, you're going to go get the conclusion. If its coordinates are negative, so I'm going to say if a point's coordinates are negative, then, and now we go get this part, it is in the fourth quadrant. Number 21. Determine if the conjecture is valid by the law of detachment. Remember that the law of detachment is if this conditional statement is true, and then they come back and tell you that P is true, then you can conclude that Q must be true. So this says, given if Tommy makes cookies tonight, then Tommy must have an oven. Then it came back and said, Tommy has an oven. You can't conclude that by law of detachment because it's not in the right order. This is our P. This part is our Q. It came back and told us that Q was true. That's not law of detachment. It has to tell us that P is true to conclude Q. So this is invalid. And last one, it says, write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the conditional statement. If an animal is a bird, then it has two eyes. So if that's our original conditional, this is our P, this is our Q. The converse flips the P and Q, so it should say, if an animal has two eyes, then it is a bird. The inverse statement just negates the hypothesis and the conclusion, but it leaves them in the same order. So it should say, if an animal is not a bird, then it does not have two eyes. And finally, the contrapositive is to flip the hypothesis and the conclusion and negate them both. So this says if an animal does not have two eyes, then it is not a bird. And that's our converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So that's our test. Make sure you study for it, and I'm sure you'll do just fine. Thank you.